Thank you for joining this morning. Becky, thank you and the IT department for getting all this together for the first ever go-to virtual meeting of the JAXPORT Authority here. So as chairman this morning and chairman for the foreseeable future, I now call this meeting to order and would like to begin, as we normally do, just take a brief time of reflection and a moment of silence just to remember all the families and those who are out of work, those who are struggling, and most importantly, those who have lost a family member or friend to the COVID-19 virus. Thank you. Before we begin this meeting, I need to make an opening statement a little bit different than previous meetings. In normal circumstances, the Jacksonville Port Authority conducts its board meetings with a quorum of board members physically present at a public location. All is required under Florida law. However, due to the COVID-19 emergency conditions, Governor DeSantis issued Executive Order 20-69 on March 20th, 2020. In relevant part, this order authorizes local government bodies for the duration of the emergency conditions to instead meet via communications, media, technology, which includes telephonic and or video conferencing as provided in section 120.54 Florida statutes. Accordingly, and to ensure the well-being of all participants, the Jacksonville Port Authority Board will conduct this and future meetings until such order is lifted via video conferencing. This board meeting, as all of our meetings, has been publicly noticed, and the public has been provided with instructions for attending this video conference. Also present with us today, CEO Eric Green, COO Fred Wong, CFO Beth McCaig, Director and General Manager of Business Development Robert Peak, Senior Director of Engineering and Construction James Bennett. They will all be presenting at this board meeting. I would also like to acknowledge and welcome and introduce Lasikia Hodges from the Office of General Counsel. And we heard previously the Honorable City Councilman Ron Salem. Thank you all for being with us this morning. As we as a board vote on items today, I ask that board members who will make a motion, or when you second a motion, if you would please state your name so that Becky can record for the record who is making motions and who is seconding such motions. I would then, on a vote, ask for those in favor to say yay. And if you do vote negatively to any motion that is put before the board today, please also state your name when you say no. Now, let's get on with the agenda. Let's start with the approval of the minutes from the Board of Directors meeting on March 9, 2020. I know all of you have seen that in the diligent board package that was distributed prior to this meeting. Could I have a motion and a name for someone to approve the minutes, please?
Daniel Bean, so moved.
John Newman, second.
Thank you, Member Bean and Member Newman. Becky, there you go. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Thank you. Next, Becky, is there anyone in the queue, or is anyone dialed in, or has anyone put forth any type of claim to have any public comments at the meeting today?
I believe, Mr. Chairman, this is Eric Green. I believe she's still on the phone with Mr. Fleming, but about 2 minutes prior to the meeting, we had no one in the queue.
Okay, well, while she's still on the phone, thank you, Eric. If there comes a time and I see Becky is off the phone now, can you confirm, Becky, that we have no one for public comments? As Mr. Green stated that probably about 2 minutes ago, we didn't.
Correct. There are no public comments, Mr. Chairman.
Perfect. Then let's move on to new business before the directors today. The very first one, James Bennett. You are going to present BD 2020-05-01 regarding a public transportation grant agreement fiscal year 2020. This is specifically relates to JAXPORT Blunt Island Marine Terminal upland improvements. James, you're recognized to present.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Julio, next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. In order to provide the funding for its capital budget, Jacksonville Port Authority often we request funding for the Florida Department of Transportation. And as a result, FDOT has allocated $2,150,000 for upland improvements at Blunt Island Marine Terminal. As a part of these requirements, JAXPORT, or FDOT requires JAXPORT to pass a resolution from its board of directors in order to receive the funding. The current public transportation grant agreement is on a 50-50 basis, with funding provided by JAXPORT of $2,150,000 for the match of FDOT's $2,150,000. We identify these specific projects in the grant agreement, and I'll show you what those projects are for this upcoming one. Slide, please. Right now, we've identified 4 overall projects and some intersection improvements along W.M. Mills and Dave Rawls to improve that main T intersection on the terminal. We're looking at a potential new entrance gate for the roll-on, roll-off equipment coming in and out of the terminal. Some potential reconfiguration of the roadways between the 2 entrance bridges coming onto the island, which would give us some more space for available parking for additional expansion, as well as a potential outbound lane to improve the flow for exiting traffic from the island. I stuck the project scope to the side of the slide simply to show you that we make certain that whenever we move forward one of these grant agreements, that we have a very, very broad scope that includes every type of application we can for the project so that it's covered as part of the original agreement. So we make sure that we have ample opportunities to make adjustments as we need to refine our projects. Next slide. So we've identified the projects initially set up for this particular agreement. The funding is in FDOT's current year, which their year ends on June 30th. And so management recommends the board adopt the attached resolution in order for JAXPORT to receive these fundings from FDOT.
Turn my hot mic back on. Are there any questions for James regarding BD 2020-0501 and this $4.3 million projects that he just discussed? James, so this, oh, go ahead, whoever that was, go ahead.
Wendy Hamilton. So do we have to spend this money within a certain amount of time, or we just get it this year and then it's at our discretion?
The grants are typically for up to a 3-year period. We can request some additional time extensions. The Department of Transportation, of course, likes you to move projects through the queue as quick as you can. We make certain that we tailor this so it gives us the opportunity to capture any design cost as well as construction. So we don't start any projects until we have this agreement in place. But we typically have, on a general basis, 3 years before the duration of the contract, this agreement ends.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a good question, and I think I remember Eric and I and Beth having a similar conversation as we're obviously all companies and all families and everybody's kind of dealing with things on the financial side and conservation of cash. So I know you guys will develop your timing and know your cash flow needs and everything and do that accordingly. Any other questions for James on that? Hearing none, and also I guess seeing no hands raised on the screen that I can see, can I have a motion to approve BD 2020-0501?
So moved, Daniel Bean.
I second Wendy Hamilton.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none and seeing none. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Hearing none, BD 2020-0501 is hereby passed. Next, our COO, Mr. Fred Wong. Fred Wong will now present BDO 2020-0502 under the Public Service Grant Agreement fiscal year 2020 as well, the JAXPORT Seaport Security. Fred, you're recognized, sir.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I hope everyone is well and safe. I am presenting BD 2020-0502, the authorization and approval for JAXPORT to enter in a public grant agreement very similar to the one James Bennett just got approved to receive the FDOT funding. It's not as robust, but JAXPORT applied for funding through the Florida Department of Transportation. As a result, FDOT has allocated $116,250 for seaport security initiatives. These initiatives include CCTV analytics software, cruise terminal access control hardening, and physical security enhancements. When some of these security initiatives are installed and completed and implemented, there may be possibly about $75,000 per year in savings due to the reduction in assigned security vendors, staff, and vehicles on non-cruise operation days. The grant is a 75-25% match with total funding of $155,000, and FDOT is responsible for $116,250, and JAXPORT is responsible for $38,750. And management respectfully recommends the board of directors adopt the attached resolution in order for JAXPORT to enter into this public grant agreement with FDOT to receive the grant fundings.
Hey, Fred, it's Jamie. I just one question. And how is it under your 2020-0502 versus the one James just presented? How is it you were able to get 75% participation and James only get 50 from FDOT?
Yeah, because it's a security through FSTED, through the Florida Ports Council. It's a separate security grant.
Oh, okay. But James, you need to work a little harder. You need to try to get 25 on yours. I don't care who it's from or what it is. It just looks like
I
we
got
can work a little hard.
only got 116,000. So
Okay.
for the record, mine's a little bit more already.
Okay, all right, that's fine. Listen, is there any questions from the board for Fred on his presentation? Any questions? I don't see any Hollywood squares lighting up, or I don't hear anything. So with that, can I have a motion to approve BD 2020-0502 from the board?
Daniel Bean,
John
so
Newman
moved.
Need a second.
I'll second Ed Fleming.
Mr. Fleming, good morning. Good to have you.
Good morning. Yeah, I
Didn't know you were on there. So Becky, you got that. So is there any discussion on the motion as made? Hearing none and seeing no hands raised, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? The motion has passed. Moving right along. Item 5, who was that? Well, Fred, that was you. Thank you. Thank you, Fred, for your presentation. Moving right along. Item 5 on our agenda for this morning is a CEO update. So Eric, unless there's some reason to change the order, you are up for your update, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Eric Green. You know, I became a little jealous when Robert and Fred and James would always show their pretty pictures. So I thought I would start mine out with some pictures because pictures, they're worth 1,000 words.
Let me just say for the record, your pictures are much better than James Bennett pictures.
As you can see by this particular slide, you know, well, can we, okay, this one here. Okay, this one. I'm not controlling this. That's why I'm going back and forth. As you can see by the slides, even during our pandemic, JAXPORT has continued to have a bustling business. You know, our model, it speak to the hard work that the employees have, that they put in every day. This is our Blunt Island facility. This particular day, we had a Norwegian cruise vessel, which is one of the vessels from Norwegian Cruise Lines that we've been receiving great revenue from for lay berth activity, as well as a tote vessel operating and a Zim vessel at the same time. So that's great, and it's always good to see. And if you can see on the West Channel there to your left, there's also 2 ro-ro berths there. So we were sort of chock-a-block that particular day and running full tilt. The next slide, please. This slide depicts workers at the tote facility on the left and members of our security team practicing safe distancing and wearing protective masks. The next slide, please. Even wearing personal protective equipment is the new norm for us. Our employees actually are wearing them when they are working alone. As you can see, one of our folks in the crane doing some crane work, as well as having lunch. Very difficult to eat lunch with one on. I'm sure he took it off, but that was one of Beth's ideas, was to serve our folks that work out on the terminals pizza on one Friday for the hard work that they've been putting in. As of today, I am proud to say that we have no positive COVID cases with any JAXPORT employee. Tomorrow, we will start having the employees return back to their building on a voluntary basis, with everyone returning on Monday, the 11th. The protocols that are implemented are as follows. All employees will have their temperature checked at the front desk. All employees are encouraged to wear a facial mask. All interior doors will remain open. A limited number of staff members in conference rooms at all times. No outside visitors, with exception of contractors who will be required to follow the same rules. No international travel for the remainder of this calendar year, and very limited domestic travel. I continue to be simply amazed at our talent and some of our employees. I would like to take a moment and recognize a couple of departments. The first is the marketing team. In April, the Jacksonville chapter of the Florida Public Relations Association awarded JAXPORT 2 awards. The first in an image award and the second in a judge award for the rebranding campaign they completed last year. The image award recognized excellence in public relation tools and campaigns. The judges awards are presented for outstanding entry that achieves maximum results while using a minimum amount of money. These awards validate our rebranding program and reflect the talent of our entire marketing team. The team was led by the marketing director, Jeff Price, and the technical expertise from Amy Klinkenberg, Whitney Croxton, and Chelsea Kavanaugh. The second recognition goes to our Talleyrand equipment department. The team took on a project to replace the festoon, which is the looping set of cables and hardware you see high up in the air on the crane. The estimated cost savings to perform this project in-house was approximately $40,000. The completion of this project highlights the technical prowess of our employees. This project was led by Assistant Manager Brandon Blanton, with technical expertise from Chris Good, Bradley Birch, Wade Taylor, Wayne Lewis, Eddie Vogel, Justin Davis, Matthew Reed, Ron Tucker, Andrew Heisen, Jack Harrison, Rod King, and Tracy Oler. I would like to say job well done by both teams. Given the downturn in the market, we have exercised very strong expense management procedures without jeopardizing our business model. Such procedures has been hiring freeze and some deferral on some capital projects. And I want to thank Beth for her and her team stepping up and realizing those savings. I'm pleased to announce that Fitch Rating Agency has affirmed its long-term A rating on JAXPORT $129.8 million in outstanding revenue bonds. This rating reflects JAXPORT's versatile financial and operating position, even in light of volatility stemming from the coronavirus pandemic. I think this speaks volumes about the strength and resiliency of our port. Hats off to Fred for his hard, dedicated work with getting the Norwegian cruise vessels back to JAXPORT. Great work on his part. Those vessels will be returning back, I believe, next week. Fred, you can correct me if I'm wrong. With that, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Mr.
Next
Chairman,
week,
if there-
or possibly even sooner.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report. Unless there are any questions, please. I'll take any questions.
Any questions from the board for Eric on his report, or any other questions you may have for Eric that may not have been addressed? Okay, then. Thank you, Eric. Next, item 6 on the agenda for this morning, reports. We have 3 reports, 3 standing committee reports. The first will be Report 2020-0501, Engineering and Construction Update. Mr. Bennett, you're recognized again to present.
Thank you, sir. First slide. Well, let me state, my pictures may not be as exciting, but they're new every time.
They are, James. You took that very well. Continue on.
This first one is the last time that you're going to get to see this particular project for a while. This is the underdeck repairs that we've had ongoing for some time at Talleyrand Marine Terminal. That contract has essentially ended. We're closing that contract out now. We've done a majority of all the repairs. There are some additional repairs that will need to be done under some of the berths at 7 and 8. However, we'll start a new contract with that one simply because this contract has been there. We've exceeded the funds on this particular contract with additional work. And so we'll start a new contract. But for this one, this will be the last time you get to see this one. Next slide, Julio. You can see we've continued to make a lot of progress. Some of the things that you see at the top left is where we've chipped out and repaired some work there for a beam. We've done some curbing, and of course you've seen some underdeck repairs many times. But if you notice on the face of our berth there where you see rebars being exposed because concrete is chipped off over time, those are the kind of repairs that we're actually taking and replacing and repairing to ensure that our berths have long-term longevity. And so we continue to make progress there. We are, again, very close. We're wrapping this project up now. Our contractor is starting to demobilize. So this will be the last chance you get to see any new pictures on this particular project. So with that, next slide. The second project that we'll talk about and close out with is the berth reconstruction project. This is the phase 2 project. You know, phase 1 was berth 35 and half of 34. This is phase 2, which is the other half of 34 and the remainder of 33 that we've been working on for some time. The project continues to make progress. It's not quite as fast as we would like, but the contractor is doing excellent quality work for us. Next slide. What you can see on this particular slide up at the top is the picture to the left is an old picture. That was from last month. And if you'll notice where the work is being done, there's a lot of open panels or open beams there. But on the right side, you can see many of those have been closed up because we are now setting panels in place. So we're starting to see a lot of that work closed up. To the far right of the top right picture, you can see all the piles have been driven. They're doing pile caps and continued to place the panels. The next step will be to add additional rebar and overlay all of those panels with additional concrete thickness. You can see there's deck panels being placed and on the bottom side, as well as the beams are being constructed. Next slide. Finally, again, the caps and decks are being constructed. You can see some of the pile caps to the top right have been cast, getting ready now to start setting some more panels there. But at the same time, we're continuing to build the crane rail beams. We are designing this berth to accommodate 50 gauge cranes, which is the picture to the left, as well as 100 gauge cranes. So the picture to the right, so we've got 2 additional landside crane rail beams that's being constructed simultaneously as well, now that we've finished all the sheet pile walls. So again, we're still making progress on it. We anticipate phase 2A, the first half of this project, to end up sometime around August, September timeframe. is when we'll finish this first phase up and turn that section over to the tenant, and we'll move on to the other half, about another almost 700 feet for phase 2B. So the projects, we're making progress. We just wish the contract was a little bit faster, but it's good work so far. And with that, that concludes my report, sir.
James, thank you. Very good report. Always ask you about your pictures, but you know, we all know too well, you know, these types of maintenance projects, we have to stay on top of and keep moving forward, because deferred maintenance is the nightmare of all operating entities, especially a port. So thanks for all the good work you're leading there. Any questions for James? Seeing none and hearing none, we'll move over. Beth McCabe, she will now present our financials report for the meeting. Beth?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to our board. Happy to have you here in this virtual meeting. Before we talk about financials for March and the first 6 months of the year, I do want to say a word about the Fitch rating that Eric mentioned. You heard him say that Fitch has just reaffirmed our rating at A stable. We are extremely pleased with this rating of both the A and the stable outlook. As you may have read, very recently, Fitch and other rating agencies have recently altered their forward outlooks for many ports, including some of our nearby competitors. Fitch did a very thorough review, and even in the midst of the uncertainty and the industry disruption, they reaffirmed our rating. And they cited these reasons. One, you know, and that is the diversity of our revenue sources, which in this period is helping us dramatically. But they also referenced our significant liquidity levels, our cash balances, which we all think seem excessive from time to time, but are extremely important to us right now. In addition, they cited our strong debt service coverage ratios, our long-term contracts with MAGs, which exceed our annual debt service, and finally, and importantly, the interlocal revenue that we receive. So all these reasons that they cite are important to us, and they're all part of our ongoing strategies to maintain a fiscally sound operation. So as you look at the income statement for March, you can see Fitch's observations reflected in our actual results. Even though cruise voyages came to a halt in mid-March and container revenue was down about 14% from budget, we were still able to produce $767,000 in income before depreciation. This was behind budget, but solidly in the black. There were several reasons for this. One, auto revenue was up for the month over budget, but it was other unbudgeted sources that boosted the net income. Fred and Eric have talked about one of them, and that is the Norwegian Cruise Lines, who laid up ships here in parts of March and April, and those ships will be coming back. Thank you, Fred. And also, we had the military exercise, which took place in late February and March. That produced $162,000 for us in revenue for the month. And by the way, that revenue from Norwegian Cruise Line for the month of March was $242,000 in additional revenue. So this revenue, coupled with very strict expense controls, as you can see from this statement, all our expense categories, with the exception of repairs and maintenance and berth maintenance dredging, ran under budget for the month. In March, as Eric said, we froze all vacant positions, and we will not replace them until we see stabilization of revenues. We have a total of 152 total approved positions, and we have 10 vacancies. This is a significant impact. The positions are split between administrative and operations staff. All the teams are working to ensure that we're operating effectively, even with the open positions. Now, at March 31st, which is our 6-month midway point through the year, you can see our total revenues are $33,300,000. That's a $1.4 million behind plan. Biggest culprits here are container revenues, which are down against budget and for the same period last year. In addition, midway through the year, we are reporting income before depreciation of $6,943,000. That's under budget, and $400,000 ahead of last year. So relative to our peers, we are doing extremely well. Now, a word about the next 6 months, which the best we can say is will be very rocky. We are able to have confidence in cargo volumes out over a very short period of time, 2, 3, 4 weeks. Beyond that, there's a great deal of uncertainty, which Robert will talk about in a minute. But with the disruption in the supply chain and the closures of auto manufacturing plants, we are conservatively projecting lower levels of activity throughout the summer. Even with a forecast of 25% decrease in throughput, however, we expect to report year-end revenues at about $61 million. That's down from the 70 of our original budget. But with continued expense control and taking advantage of opportunities like the layup of the Norwegian vessels and additional military moves expected in June, we expect that we will end the year with a positive income before depreciation of just under $5 million. One of the things that helps us with this is we closed our refunding of our 2012 bonds in March. We will give the board and the audit committee details on this at our June meeting. But suffice it to say, not only did we save an estimated present value savings by refinancing of nearly $17 million, but our run rate now on a blended rate on that $87 million worth of debt is about 2.2. In addition, 2.2%, significantly down from the over 4% that those 2012 bonds were running. In addition, because of the refinancing and the way it took place this year and the timing, the refinancing saved us about $2 million in debt service this year. Now, Julio, if we could look at the balance sheet, the next slide. When we think about liquidity and Fitch's comment on the strong liquidity that they like to see, Julio, if we could, yeah, thank you. You can see our cash balance right now is $17.5 million. We are working with our accounts receivable diligently to keep cash flowing. You'll also see the other highlighted area, that's our line of credit. It's a $20 million balance right now. This is the planned use of the funding. We're using this, the line of credit to fund the construction going on at berths 33 and 34, which James talks about. We get reimbursement on that beginning in July of 75% from payments from FDOT. So we have modeled the use of that line to make available enough money to do the improvements, and then we wait for the reimbursement from the state. You will see in non-current assets that $13.5 million grants receivable from the state. That is reflective of what they owe us on that berth construction. And the last slide, Julio, please, is vital stats. Just more of the same. You will see we are down in TEUs, down 13% from budget and down from prior period last year. Not unexpected because we have had blank sailings. Autos on budget right now, but as we said, we know that the auto manufacturers across the world curtailed production. They are starting back up in Europe and we believe Mexico, but we know that the startup will be slow. So we're expecting very months in automobile throughput in June. So summing up, we have a couple of rough months ahead. Our finance team is working very diligently with our sales team to make sure that we're taking every action we can to protect the health of the organization and come out of the year with the strongest bottom line possible. We appreciate Fred and James and the whole ops team deferring certain capital expenditures until next year, again, so we save cash until we can get back to what we consider a stabilized situation where we can be predicting from month to month what our revenues will be. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will be available for any questions.
Beth, thank you. And for those of you who may not see me typing in the chat room as you were presenting, just a quick note, just because there's a little background noise. If you're not speaking, it's pretty easy. Just put your microphone on mute, and then if you need to say something, you can click it back on. Most of you are, so thank you for that. Any questions for Beth on the financial report?
Mr. Chairman, John Newman, I have a quick question for Beth. It's not specifically on the report itself, but slightly different. You know, businesses are giving a lot of breaks to customers because of the COVID-19 scenario, which was unprecedented. Do we have any of our, without naming, of course, are there any customers attempting to try to mitigate their financial obligations to us with MAGs, for instance, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which of course they forecasted, predicated on numbers and scenarios, certainly before this COVID-19 came about. So are we getting any of our customers saying, hey, can we renegotiate this or take another look at that? Of course, which affect us our bottom line. Of course, the contracts are the contracts, but I'm just curious as to whether there is any hinting from many of our customers wanting to kind of renegotiate things and mitigate their own financial situations. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. And Eric may also want to comment on this, but it's not unexpected that we have had several situations where we have been asked either to defer payment or extend payment terms or to give a break. And our position is that we do not have the strength or the liquidity to be allowing extension of terms. And so we have taken a pretty hard stance to say our terms are the terms, and we'd like our clients, our tenants, and others to live by them. Eric, I don't know if you'd like to expand on that.
Yes, if I may, Mr. Chairman, this is Eric Green. Beth is absolutely right. Dr. Newman, we did receive a force majeure letter from Carnival Cruise Lines, but they well met their MAG already this fiscal year. So, and then we significantly offset what we typically would receive in revenues from them for the lay berth cruises with Norwegian Cruise Line. So we're a little ahead of the game on the cruise side.
Very good. Any follow-up, Mr. Newman? Is that good?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'm good.
Any other members, comments, or questions for Beth on her presentation?
Yeah, Jamie, I'd just like to say to everyone, once we go down the path of giving discounts, since we're a public record operation, everyone would know. So it's pretty dangerous. And so they're doing a great job just saying no.
I couldn't agree more, Member Clarkson. I couldn't agree more, and I think Eric has taken that position. So great job. And Fred, any more cruise ships you can bring in and dock alongside our berths? We got some open space. You've done a great job with that. And who'd have known they tried to pull back out there, but you tell them they got to burn some more expensive fuel to be out in the ocean, just kind of putting around out there as opposed to tied up next to our berths. That's pretty good negotiating tactics there.
Thank you, sir. Under these circumstances, it's always tough, but the decisions were made, and hopefully in our future, Norwegian will have a home over here. So let's cross our fingers and keep the prayers up, right?
Good job. Good job. Anything else? If not, we will move on to the commercial highlights, the final presentation of this morning. Robert Peak, you are recognized to give us your commercial report. Robert.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. We remain very busy on the commercial front, connecting with our customers and our tenants virtually because we're working from home, they're working from home. But the economy has slowed, but we have not. Somehow we've gotten as busy as ever. And I'll speak to some specific opportunities we're pursuing and how we're generating business in this environment. But first, I did want to give an update on our industry right now, and given the coronavirus and its impacts, because I think that context will be helpful. So despite all the disruptions in the supply chain, the global supply chain, starting with the Asian supply chain, has really generally held fairly well. Product manufacturing in Asia and elsewhere around the globe is really returning slowly, but that means the supply side of our equation is slowly returning in terms of containerized goods. And that means production is gradually returning. And when you look at ports, pretty much all global ports, major global ports and U.S. ports, they remain open and operational. So some terminals within U.S. ports, they've reduced their operating hours or their work days, But the ports remain open, including all JAXPORT terminals remain open. The ships are coming and going. Now, many of those ships, as Beth alluded to, they're carrying less cargo. And because we've seen a reduction on the U.S. demand side as retail outlets and businesses have closed. And to adapt to that reduction in container volume, the global ocean carriers have indeed blanked. That is, they've canceled sailings into the United States. So from about February through June, we now know of about 200 total blank sailings announced by the global ocean carriers of sailings that were due into the United States. But of those, there's maybe about a half dozen or so container ship blankings at JAXPORT that we realize. We've had a few, which Beth mentioned, and we know there's a few more coming over the summer. And that number could increase because carriers are likely to add more blank sailings if volumes don't rebound more. But in all, we can weather this very well in terms of the blank sailings because we handle between 50 and 60 container ships in a month. So handling half a dozen blank sailings over the course of a few months is something that we certainly can handle. If you go to the next slide, please, Julio. Now, volumes at pretty much every major U.S. container port saw year-over-year declines in March, and the range of that declines varies. March is the most recent month that we have numbers for all these ports. So what this chart is showing is the percentage drop in TEUs at some of these key ports, and this is year-over-year for March. And what you're seeing is that ports with diversified trade lanes in the container trade, their volumes fared much better than others. So if you look at the far left, you see Port of Virginia, they were down 5.3% year-over-year for March. They're very diversified. They have trade lanes in Asia, South America, Europe, and elsewhere. You see that our year-over-year volumes in March were down 8%. And that's contrast with, if you look to the right of the chart, with ports on the West Coast, you see Port of Los Angeles. They lost almost a third of their container volumes in March. I'm sure much of that was Asia and China specifically. So while we do not have April volumes yet, it's looking like April actually could be a little bit of an unusual month. And that's because while volumes overall have been declining, in April, some ports, including JAXPORT, we might actually see a little bump up in volumes. But that's temporary because there was a sweet spot of time a few weeks ago when manufacturing, particularly in Asia, returned and volumes had not yet dropped off in the United States because we were not completely shut down. And so there was this window of time where production had returned in overseas, demand had not dropped off in the US. Those sailings occurred in March, those volumes hit in April. So our April volumes very well could be higher than our March volumes, but that's not an indication that volumes are returning yet in any sustained way. We almost certainly will see volumes decline again in May. April was just an unusual situation. And as Beth mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty in forecasting right now when you get more than a month or two out, particularly among many of our major customers. To give you one example, one of the world's largest global ocean container carriers, they sent out a notice recently that they will no longer accept any bookings beyond 6 weeks out because they just have too much uncertainty in the market in terms of what they're going to need to do with their assets to take bookings beyond that. If you go to the next slide for me, please. So in the big picture, we're confident that volumes will rebound. It's really a question of when, and it depends, as you know, largely on supply and demand. On supply, as I mentioned, a lot of that production's returning. The demand we see as Florida opens up, as other states open up some of their businesses, some of that demand is slowly returning. And that's true in Puerto Rico as well. Puerto Rico was largely shut down as of mid-March. And the governor there is easing restrictions there and slowly opening businesses there as well. Part of that demand has to be consumer confidence, something I mentioned last month. It's not enough that production returns. The demand has to return with the consumer confidence. A number of economists, I'm sure you're aware, they're predicting now not a quick recovery, but a so-called U-shaped recovery. That's a gradual resumption of production and a gradual resumption in demand, and that's spread out over time. And if that is the case, if that's borne out, we can expect to see a similar gradual recovery on our volumes. And that's assuming no major setbacks to the economy due to the virus. That's all on the container side, but the automobile side is very similar. So as Beth mentioned, in March, automakers all over the world fairly much shut down a lot of their assembly, either for days at a time or for weeks at a time. And that included here in the United States, and that shut off a lot of the supply. So a few weeks ago, the U.S. National Automobile Dealers Association, they reduced their forecast of new U.S. car sales in the United States by 20% for the year. Well, for April, when our numbers come in, we project our vehicle volumes will be down somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 15% year over year. And we're likely to be down, as Beth mentioned, in May again, because we're also seeing some canceled or blank chip sailings on the Ro-Ro side. Now, some auto plants, as Beth mentioned, they have returned or they're slowly reopening. They're not going full throttle with all their shifts, but they're ramping up. And they are dependent not only upon labor, but in many cases upon parts that might be sourced from other factories, that might be in other countries, which might or might not be in different stages of opening. That's true of a lot of global manufacturing in the United States. Most of the plants were all shut down in April. Most of the automakers in the U.S., including foreign automakers in the U.S., they have announced plans to open their plants in the U.S. in May. So you're going to see kind of a phased opening of those plants. So by the end of May, we would expect, without setbacks, a lot of auto production in the U.S. and around the world will have returned. And like containers, those vehicle volumes will return at some point. It's a question of how quickly, depending upon, again, consumer demand and consumer confidence. So we have similar scenarios, I think, in autos and containers. So despite that and those challenges, we're not just kind of sitting back and waiting for the economy to rebound. Eric has challenged the sales team, and I've challenged the sales team to be aggressive to grow volumes where we can, and really to take advantage of our diversification, because that allows us to be creative in our business development because we have so many avenues to pursue. So you go to the next slide for me, please. And so I'll share a few of these concrete steps we're taking right now and to focus on some of that creativity. So one focus, as it always is to go to our base, and that's shippers in Northeast Florida and in Florida, which we always do. But our focus right now is on commodities that make the most sense for us right now, and shippers that make the most sense. And that includes shippers among our local medical community. So our sales team has reached out to local major medical centers to offer assistance in logistics of importing their medical supplies. We actually were able to help a local hospital last month with a specific request to expedite a shipment of their face masks. And that prompted us to really call all major medical centers and ask if they needed help. Our terminals we handle a lot of imported and exported medical supplies. And as you can imagine, these are high demand products. These are the personal protection equipment, the masks, the ventilators, cleaning supplies, disinfectants, all the products that you can imagine would be related to the medical field right now. And this is a way that we feel we can be a helpful corporate citizen, at the same time conduct the business we need to conduct. So likewise, we've reached out to all of our tenants, our major shippers, and our carriers, and we've asked them, how can we help you right now? And one more concrete result that came of that. So in April, some of our container shippers, they needed storage for some non-essential goods that had come in containerized. These were the volume bump I mentioned. These largely were orders that were placed before the virus took hold here. The orders were not canceled. The volumes came in. The retail outlets and warehouses were closed. These shippers needed a place to store those goods. So our sales team helped to match up these requests for storage of these non-essential items with our terminal operators, local logistics providers, and warehouses to give them a place to store these goods. And that's been a really good opportunity for us to help some of our major shippers. Within our containerized cargoes, our traditional cargoes, one bright spot for us I have on the slide is forest products. As I mentioned last month, our forest product volumes are projected to be up 10 to 15% for the foreseeable future. That includes the import of wood pulp to make things like paper towel and toilet paper. And we're staying in front of everyone in that supply chain for that kind of production. And that includes the overseas producers of the pulp, the shipping supply chain players in between, and the end user manufacturers here in the United States. And that's to ensure we capture all the volume we can of this commodity, because again, that's a commodity that's really hot right now. We also continue to handle project cargoes, things like machinery and transformers and oversized equipment. That continues to move through the port despite the economic slowdown. And there's one more example I'll give. We are leveraging our foreign trade zone by doing something new. I'm not sure if we've ever done this before, but we have announced that for any company which applies to be an FTZ user by July 31st, we are deferring our application fee for 90 days. And that's a $2,500 fee. And one local company, Shoreside Logistics, they're a full service transportation company. They offer things including warehousing. They applied in April to join our FTZ. They were approved by the National Foreign Trade Zone Board and the local U.S. Customs Office immediately, and they've already activated their facility in Jacksonville. That whole FTZ process, from the start of their application to approval and activation, it took 10 days. So the credit goes to our FTZ manager, Debbie Lofberg, and to our local U.S. Customs Office for their efficiency. And that's a message we have for other businesses out there. This does not have to be a long, drawn-out process. It can be done very quickly, and it's something that can help you right now. And there's 3 other Jacksonville companies in our FTZ. They're all taking steps right now to expand their footprint in Jacksonville. And that's to accommodate either existing volumes or projection of new volumes. And all that international cargo, the vast, vast majority of it that's moving through those FTZ facilities are coming through JAXPORT. So in all, this work is really, it's a collective work based on a collective understanding among the sales and marketing team that despite the challenges, we cannot just kind of sit and wait for the economy to rebound to capture traditional container and automobile volumes. Those will come eventually, but we're beating all the bushes now on the things that we can do now to generate volume and revenue. If you go to the next slide for me, please. So that's kind of an overview, just to give you some context of what the environment we're working on, and I'll speak to some specific opportunities. So we have $11.1 million in the pipeline right now. Those various ocean carriers, that work continues. Now, for some of those carriers, which those are the big revenue movers for us, those discussions have slowed a little bit in the last month or two because the carriers are really focused on handling what's in front of them right now with this virus. It has not eliminated or changed their long-term plans as they relate to JAXPORT, but some of our conversations have shifted to more immediate needs. So we stay in regular contact with those carriers, and we know those more strategic discussions will continue very soon. Project Red, I have on your screen there. This is a long-term project, and it would involve the export of a fuel additive in liquid bulk form. And so liquid bulk is a cargo type we've handled for, decades. Different kinds of commodities. We've handled everything from molasses to fructose to caustic soda. But I mentioned this one because it's another example of a specific business we're pursuing beyond our container and automobile cargoes, which are difficult right now. And this one opportunity would generate $175,000 in new business for us. Project Protein, they're an exporter of meat and other proteins to the Caribbean and elsewhere. This could generate $120,000 for us. Now the virus and its aftermath, it could slow the full scale of these exports because what's happening with proteins right now. But we're optimistic that we'll see some of these volumes because that Caribbean market and others will need these proteins. Project Cardstock, this will be imports of new paperboard from Brazil. And this material is used for, among other things, packaging of small retail items like pharmaceuticals. And paperboard and wood pulp, they're 2 of our brightest spots. And we're seeing increase in all of our forest products. This would be another $90,000 a year for us. And then Project Jetstream, these are container imports. And I mentioned them because they are in our sweet spot. These are retail consumer goods that are destined for Central Florida, but they're coming in right now, imported through ports in states to the north of us. And logistically, it makes perfect sense that those cargoes should be coming in through a Florida port. and JAXPORT makes the most sense logistically. So we're confident with these volumes, and I'll report when we lock down those. So those are some examples of some of the opportunities we're pursuing in this environment right now. You go to the next slide, please. And I'll briefly share these are some wins. These are things we've actually landed. So this month we began handling the import of door skins from South America. Door skins, if you don't know, it's kind of the wood veneer that goes on the outside of the door. And these shipments, they're headed for local warehousing and distribution, about 2,400 TEUs a year. We've also worked with an existing shipper to export about 1,400 TEUs annually of food products that have started, that they're going to grocery stores and distributors in the Caribbean and Latin America. And that volume has already begun. And then the lighting hardware imports, this is a Central Florida company which sells commercial lighting products. And they're now using JAXPORT to import their lighting hardware, about 150 TEUs a year. And I mentioned the forest products. This is another specific example. This shipper recently selected JAXPORT to handle an additional 20,000 metric tons of wood pulp. But those volumes are not from South America. These volumes are from Finland. And so combined, these new business opportunities, they represent about $100,000 a year annually in new revenue for us. So again, times are a little difficult now with our traditional volumes, but we're turning over all the rocks we can to find new business. We do have other opportunities in the pipeline, but I want to give you a snapshot of these to see how we're kind of conducting our business in this environment. So that's really my commercial report, Mr. Chairman. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Robert. Any questions for Robert on a very detailed and a very thorough and good report? Mr. Fleming, Mr. Clarkson, Ms. Hamilton, Dr. Newman, Mr. Bean, any questions for Robert?
John Newman, just a great report, Robert. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for that great report.
Thank you, sir.
With that, we'll move on to item 6 on the agenda, other business. As now chairman of the board of JAXPORT, as part of my role, I will no longer be chairing the audit committee for the rest of this fiscal term. Wendy Hamilton is going to step in and act as chairman for this period of the audit committee. Palmer Clarkson is going to be our vice chairman, and I need another member. This is a unilateral appointment on my part, and hope this is not some surprise, but our newest board member, Daniel Bean, I'm appointing him to be a voting member of the audit committee. Daniel, I appreciate your willingness to serve on that committee. And as always, I encourage all members of the board to attend the audit committee meetings as we typically do and try to, but those will be our 3 voting members. So thank you, Wendy, Palmer, and Daniel for serving in that capacity. Next item, I have on my agenda here, there have been no emergency purchases and there have been no unbudgeted transactions since our meeting in March through today. Before we close, before I ask the members if there's anything they'd like, any new business or any other comments they'd like to share. Councilman Salem, are you still with us?
I am, Mr. Chair. Thank you for recognizing me. I wanted to mention to the board that this past Tuesday night, we passed a resolution that I initiated myself over the last few months in investigating the JEA situation when we determined that they had 13 employee contracts, and I became very curious to other employee contracts within the city of Jacksonville, determined there were just a few, and determined that the heads of our authorities appropriately had employee contracts. That is this entity, the airport, and the JTA, and felt like the leaders of those entities ought to have an employee contract for stability and leadership reasons. But I personally did not believe that those employee contracts should go beyond the CEOs. Went through the committee process. My colleagues agreed 18-1, So that will be coming to you, I think, Mr. Chair, as well as to Mr. Green, that resolution, just letting you know how the council feels about employee contracts.
Well, we appreciate your leadership on that item, and we'll continue to maintain and strengthen and ensure that our good governance controls. I think you were with us a few meetings ago, 2 meetings ago, when we, passed our guidelines along those same lines. So we always appreciate your leadership, and know we're moving forward. Know the city is going to come back. Our economy locally in the U.S. and around the globe will eventually get back. These are difficult times. I think one of the big things we have to make sure we continue to do as we come out of this recovery is move forward with the commitments that we've made, and that we have the things that will drive economic growth and development. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, and the members don't either, but as it comes to our dredging of the river to make this port the economic engine that we all decided it would be, and know that it can be better than it is today several years ago. We hope that we can continue to move forward that with our commitments, and we appreciate your leadership and your support of what we're doing here at the port, Councilman Salem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there any other business before the board today? Any other members have anything they'd like to bring?
Mr. Chairman, John Newman, if I could really quickly, let me say,
Yes, sir.
You never could have envisioned that this would be the first, your first board meeting would be like this. So welcome to your chairmanship, sir. I think I speak on behalf of the board. I think you did a fantastic job with great aplomb and decorum. And thank you for one last thing, continuing the tradition of giving James Bennett a hard time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Newman. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here today, and have a great rest of the week. Be safe. Come back out, support your local businesses, and thank you all. Have a great day. This meeting is adjourned.